Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first event of the year, EU in 2024 Challenges and Opportunities. I extend a very warm welcome to my today's guest, Mark Varga, who is a senior analyst at the Migration Research Institute in Budapest. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Liliana, for having me as a guest.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Well, so maybe let's go directly to the topic. So the pandemic and the war in Ukraine actually have exposed many of the European Union's weaknesses, above all with regard to, first of all, very long procedures, multi-stage decision-making process, but also, on the other hand, Europe dependence on countries that are, let's say, not necessarily considered as our allies today. 2024 also appears to be a pivotal, as it is also a European election year. All right, and I also believe that these elections will be a historic decision on the fate of Europe. But looking ahead, what do you think? What are the biggest challenges facing European Union in 2024?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge is economic growth, to restore that after the pandemic and after the breaking out of the war. And I see some measures which the European Union can use to recover it from these two shocking events. It is a debate that the war itself caused the economic shock after the pandemic, the second economic shock to the European Union, or the sanctions. So all of those answers to the Russian-Ukrainian war caused that. Well, I'm not an economist, so I can't be a judge of that. But I think the biggest challenge is Europe to recover from that, because if it regains economic stability, if inflation gets in a slower pace, and if inflation reduces, then we can say that more or less we will be back on track and focus more on such issues as the green transition, for example, which is I think it's a more strategical, more important in long term important issue of Europe. But the first step is to recover from the economic shock. The second challenge, I think, is still migration, which we'll talk, I think, more, as I am the senior analyst of the Migration Research Institute, as you said. So we dealt with a lot of topics. We are focusing on not just on Europe, but on Africa and the Middle East, where the situation has not been better than in the last 2 years. So in 2023 was not better at all in 2022, which was the first year after COVID, let's say. During the COVID, we had smaller numbers, but after that, we just get higher and higher. So migration as the challenge of the European Union remains with us in the nearby future too. So I think these are the two biggest challenges which will face Europe. And then let's talk about our ally, the United States, our biggest ally. What will happen? What will be the strategy of the United States if Joe Biden wins the presidency again, or Donald Trump comes back? I think there are two strategies, and each of them are emerges very, very big questions. Especially if Trump comes back, what will the policy of the United States be? as is, I think, considered to be more isolationist. He wants to isolate maybe the United States in a way from Europe. What will be the future of NATO? I think security policy is also a big challenge. What will the European Union do if the role of the NATO will change? Does the European Union want to take steps towards the security union too? Because nowadays we can't say that serious steps has been made, as all the European member states are relying their security policy on NATO membership. So these are the three biggest challenges, I think, this year.
Exactly. There is also quite a famous quote of Warren Buffett, which is, only when the tide goes out do you learn who has been swimming naked. And I believe that this certainly applies to energy and actually the migration policy, or maybe the lack of it actually in the EU, which are largely driven by political decisions in the EU. But as far as the migration policy is concerned, I believe the main problem is that there is still a taboo at the European policy level on organizing an asylum procedures, especially outside the EU, to maybe to combat the people smugglers. Somehow Australia managed this issue with the, for example, Papua New Guinea agreement. But what do you think? Like, does the European Union have any idea about the migration policy? And what about Hungary? Are there any dissenting voices regarding also the forced relocation of migration that is most likely going to be implemented in the EU very soon?
Yes, the good news is that after so many years, so after 2025, when the crisis broke out, maybe not in 2015, but maybe earlier, because in Italy we could see certain very worrying migratory moves before 2015. So actually Germany was affected and Hungary and Greece was affected in 2015, but I think the crisis started earlier. And it had signs way before 2014 or so, because the Cayuco crisis in Spain, in the Canary Islands, was in 2006, when in a very short-term period, 32,000 people reached the Canary Islands. So I think it was an early sign of that something has changed. And the Geneva Convention, it's not suited for such migratory moves. It was a totally different era in 1951 when the Geneva Convention was signed. Then nowadays we have big influx of migrants from North Africa and from the Middle East. But as I said, finally they have come to a certain agreement. And I would say, and I often quote myself in the public media also, that this solution, it's not a real solution. So the pact, I'm talking about the pact, of course, which was finalized, the text was finalized finally in December under the Spanish presidency of the EU. So it's not a solution, it's just a compromise. I think no one can be satisfied with that. And I don't know the fate of it, really. There are still big tensions, and we have a long procedure until it will be implemented. So we have a rough way still ahead. And Hungary has a major role in those fractions. We can't deny that it has been opposing the pact since the beginning. We have a rough way, and until some solution will come up which will be accepted by everyone, every nation state, until that we will have solutions by the nation state. So kind of individual solutions and not on the community level. But we can tell about 2023, I think, in brief, and there are very important numbers that nearly 1 million asylum applications were submitted in the European Union by citizens of such countries. And most applications, more than 304,000, were judged in Germany, while France is in the second place and Italy is in the third place. And compared to the previous year, so 2022, the number of applicants increased by 168% in Latvia, actually. So Latvia grew the most, 119% in Estonia, 74% in Germany, and 37% in France. And meanwhile, but there are also countries where the number of applications decreased. 56% in Denmark, 54% in Malta, 52% in Cyprus, and 41% in Austria, which were the results of legal strictures and agreements concluded with issuing and transit countries. So there is a nation-state solution, change the legislation, and agree with the issuing and transit countries. Hungary, of course, continued rejecting almost everyone. Total of 26 applications were submitted in Hungary between
How many?
January. 23. Between January
23.
and October. We don't have the November and December data, but it's just, exactly 26. Yeah, 26. So that's just really nothing. So we have this position holding. And the largest group of illegal arrivals were Syrians, followed by Afghans, Venezuelans, Turks, Colombians, Bangladeshis, and Pakistanis. And the proportion of people of coming from the Sahel increased the most. It's very, very interesting. It's also a last year's phenomenon. So 733% more people arrived on the Italian shores from Mali, and 450% more people from Sudan in 2023 than the previous year. So I think the Sahel remained a conflict zone, which produces a lot of migrants for the European Union. And also the Sudan civil war is a very, very bad phenomenon in 2023 from a European perspective, because these Sudanese people started to reach Europe. The biggest internal displacement is the Sudan war. So not to forget that first, the people in Africa, they don't come directly to Europe. They just go to the other part of the conflicted country. So in Sudan, like millions, really more than 5 millions or nearly 6 million people have been internally displaced. But with these high numbers, a little proportion of them always tries to go to Europe. So if a big percentage or a small percentage of a big number of people, a big amount of people comes to the European Union, in Europe, that means a big influx. Never forget, Africa is a big continent with a huge population. So even if a small amount of these people goes to Europe, the small European Union has a big problem. And we can see that from 2015. And the other main issue, of course, remains the Ukraine. And I just want to mention that in 2023, 4.16 million Ukrainian citizens were registered in the EU countries. of which 1.17 million Ukrainians live in Germany. So it has been a big issue and remains a big issue, but the solutions remain nation state level solutions.
But we mentioned in the beginning the relocation mechanism. And tell me, because I don't really understand it. So let's say a certain amount of people will be relocated, let's say to Poland or, I don't know, Slovakia or, I don't know, Czechia. But we have a Schengen zone within the EU. So let's say they are going to be relocated to Poland, but does it mean that they cannot then move, for example, to Germany? Or how is the situation?
Yes, the first relocation scheme, which failed, was presented by the Juncker Commission years ago, and if I remember well, not just Hungary opposed it and sued the Commission for that, but also Poland did it. But it expired, so it had no consequences, basically, and it is considered a failure. And the European Union, and especially the von der Leyen Commission, doesn't boast about it at all, and they don't refer to it as a good example. Nevertheless, the relocation scheme is also in the new pact, so I think they stepped in the same river again. They didn't invent really a new scheme, and I think Hungary is not the biggest, but one of the biggest problem with that. And our prime minister, I think, says it out loud that this clearly didn't work. So why do you force it? This relocation scheme, which didn't work out, it seems it didn't work out because under the Schengen zone, as you said, and inside the Schengen zone, people can move freely. So if you transfer somebody, as you said, to Poland or Latvia or I don't know, in hours he or she can be in Germany or Austria or maybe in Scandinavia countries. So it didn't really work out. And there are many concerns, and that's why I told you that it's just a compromise and not a solution. Because there are these relocation quotas, there are certain numbers for the solidarity, 30,000, but imagine that more than 350,000 people reached the shore last year in the European Union, reached the Schengen borders, the external borders. So 30,000 compared to 350,000, well, I don't think that points toward a real solution. But we will see how it will work out. But we at the Institute, we are not optimistic about the new pact, and especially this part of the pact, the relocation scheme at all. There are also very good and I think progressive parts of the pact, but I think it's not completely on a new ground. And as you said, the completely new ground, which would be the something similar like the Rwanda scheme, in which Great Britain tries to introduce. Well, they don't have time for that, I think, because it goes very slowly, and human rights lawyers sue them before different courts. So the conservative government of the United Kingdom tries to make a kind of a political product from this migration issue, which is very concerning also in the UK. The Channel migration, nearly 60,000 border violators crossed the English Channel to Great Britain last year. So it's a big problem in the UK. But we will see if they will succeed. But the elections will take in autumn or December. So I don't know if they can show to the people of the European Union They are outside the European Union already, but still can show that there is another way dealing with a third country outside the European Union and just bring all the people, relocate the people immediately who are crossing illegally your border, which is a maritime border in this case, and then like thousands of kilometers away in Africa, they can proceed. They can handle their asylum, and then the procedure can take place there with no violation of human rights and etc. But European Union doesn't go that way yet.
Yep.
So I think the Rwanda scheme, if it works, it would be a very, very important step to show that there is another way than relocation.
Yeah, very interesting what you have just described, and let's hope that the policymakers in the EU will, let's say, realize that there is another way, because the way that we are trying to implement since some time is not working and probably will not work. And just tell me, last question regarding the migration. Do you think, looking at the trend that you have described a couple of minutes ago, it seems like it's growing? And what are your forecasts for 2024? Do you think that the numbers will grow again? Because they grew like enormously, because you showed us a couple of data and it increased enormously. Do you think it's also the case of 2024? Will it also increase?
Well, it depends of two things, of course. The first thing, what will happen in Africa? I think we are now mostly concerned about Africa and not the Middle East. In Africa, the situation is not getting better. So from the countries of origin, we have bad news. There were many coups, Niger, and all those Sahel countries. For example, in Burkina Faso, there are still these riots, and so the situation is really, really bad. And so the push factors remain the same as last year. We don't expect that in Africa the situation will get better. So the pressure will be high, and especially the Sudan civil war, according to our biggest expert in the institute, Mr. Director Marshall, who is the expert of this region, Sudan, Egypt, the Horn of Africa. He says that he's very pessimistic that the civil war in Sudan will not end. So that will increase also the arrival of the Sudanese on the Italian shores. And Italy will be the most affected. As it was last year, the central Mediterranean route was the most affected by migration. The Western Balkan route was not that affected last year, but the central Mediterranean was in deplorable conditions on Lampedusa. We saw all the footages about arriving migrants, and also the Canary Islands in the autumn saw a big surge of migrants. The other part, of course, is the target countries. So what will happen, especially in Germany and especially in France and Austria, I would say? Well, Germany, I'm not optimistic. I think the big popularity, the growing popularity of the Alternative für Deutschland is mainly due to the migration issue. So people, like in other countries before, like in Sweden or let's say the Netherlands, are willing to vote for anti-immigration parties. So there's a pattern, I think, that if people really want to see a big change in the immigration policy of a certain Western European country, we are talking about now the West, and it's not a Central European problem, let's say, in a way that the Western European countries have this problem, of course. So this is quite different. So let's speak about the West. I think that it clearly shows that if people are really unsatisfied, how are things going on regarding immigration and integration policy, they just vote for those parties who has this issue on their
Yeah.
agenda, as the Finns party, the Swedish Democrats, or Wilders Party of Freedom in the Netherlands. So Alternative für Deutschland is a very interesting case, and but Germany has many other problems too, which results to such popularity of the AFD, especially in the eastern part, not just the migration issue, and partly because of the migration, partly because of all these other things like the farmers' problems and maybe the supporting Ukraine, or the big financial problems of the Germany's budget, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
The government has to take steps back, I think, also in migration, and has to make restrictive policy also about migration if they want to keep their chairs, actually. So I think now it seems that their chairs, so the government itself is at stake. Their popularity of this coalition, which consists of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, has been decreasing. AFD and CDU is gaining popularity. So they are in big trouble. And maybe this year they will have a shift. I'm not optimistic about that. I think they had clear signs from the German society. They haven't made steps back yet. And maybe they will go on this way. I don't know. France, on the other hand, I think they have learned lessons, and now their new law, which is very progressive, has clear answers for the phenomena. I think it's a good sign that also there are some changes in the legislation. Well, we will see if they can succeed. I don't know if it will be, because I think now that the Conseil État is examining the text, and maybe some parts will be unconstitutional. So we will see what will happen in France, but France has made a big step forward to normality, let's say. And the Netherlands is also, I think, the third country which will be a good example that all these policies can be reversed. Sweden has started to take steps. In Denmark, one of the policymakers told me that for Denmark took more than 20 years to correct all those bad steps they have been made. And Sweden just started, so good luck for the next 20 years. I don't know if they will succeed because it's a big security issue already in Sweden, the migration and the failure of the integration of certain groups of migrants, especially in big Swedish cities. So the Netherlands can be another good example if they will have finally a new government and take firm steps towards a restrictive migration policy.
Thank you very much for this extensive explanation on what's actually happening in the EU. but there are conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine. There are the intensifying worldwide rifts that could potentially contribute to the significant restructuring of global, let's say, geopolitics. We can see some shifts, and this would also involve a transition towards the so-called new world order. And what do you think? How will the European Union position itself on the global stage in near future?
I think the last real ideologist and real, let's say, European statesman, and it's just my opinion, of course, was Jacques Delors, and we buried him like a week ago. Uh, and he said hello. I think he was the last real common European thinker. He was a liberal, but still, after the Delors Commission, only maybe the German Chancellor Angela Merkel was a big ideologist, let's say, or the real leader of the whole European Union. And since the Merkel era ended, we cannot see anyone who thinks about really deeply about the future of the whole European Union as a whole. So, and the place in the global order, as you said, I don't see politicians, especially in Western Europe, maybe Emmanuel Macron can be this politician who has a clear strategic view about the European Union's position worldwide on the global stage. So let's see who will be the president of the new European Commission. Will there be a big strategy, a firm strategy, a clear strategy about Europe's place in this in the global conflicts in the new world era? And I especially like, by the way, Macron's strategic autonomy. This is not defined, though. So I think if Macron in the near future goes on with, and European politicians, not just Macron, will have the time and the energy not just to manage these really annoying everyday problems and all these crises, but to think strategically about the next 20 or even 50 years. They, I think, must clarify the content of the term. So this term must be clarified because the concept of the strategic autonomy sounds good in the political communication space, but it's now not without contradictions, especially since its ultimate goal remains unclear. I don't know if for you, but for me, the ultimate goal is unclear. So, under what circumstances can Europe call itself strategically autonomous? By becoming self-sufficient in the critical sectors, or by controlling supply chains. So, in the course of globalization, interdependence has developed between the actors. So, neither party has an interest in unilaterally breaking the relationship, while they are able to influence the other actors through asymmetric dependency relations. And the perfect example of this is how Russia tried to take advantage of Europe's dependence on fossil energy carriers after starting the war in 2022. So strategic autonomy is not about the illusory search for independence, but rather the strategic management of complex interdependence relationships. So the European Union and its member states have two tasks. I think first they should examine in which areas they are subject to asymmetrical interdependencies, and secondly, they must look for solutions on how these relations can be transformed so they do not pose a threat to the European economy. I don't know if they can fulfill this task in the near future, but I think it's essential.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this interesting insights that you gave us. So I think we can all agree that this year would be extremely important to set some, let's say, goals, but they will be also quite difficult because we have, let's say, election year, and I believe that the politicians most likely will be focused on different issues, not probably clearing the situation. But thank you very much for your today's presence during our first event in 2024. Thank you very much. Thank you also to the Migration Research Institute, and I'm wishing our viewers a nice evening.
Thank you so much.